What is one effective strategy used by political campaigns? There isn't just one. There are several. And we're going to talk about them in this video. I am going to talk about the one that all winners have in common. And if you're interested in how to figure out a strategy for your political campaign, you might want to stick around because I got a lot to share with you. We're going to talk about several things at this point, and I'm going to do a deep dive on several. And one that we're going to start with, in addition to your message, your advertising strategy, your targeting, is perhaps the most important, is defining the election on your terms. And let me tell you what I mean by that. We'll start with an example. As I sit here talking to you, the year is 2024. In a few months, we will elect a new president or choose to keep the one we have. It is President Biden versus former President Trump. Both of them want to define this election on their terms. President Trump is going to talk about why he was a better steward of the economy, and he's going to want voters to be thinking about Joe Biden's inflation, Joe Biden's porous border, and the lackadaisical attitude people have about the shape of the current economy. That's what he wants voters to be thinking about when they go into the voting booth. President Biden wants voters to be thinking about something completely different. He wants women to be concerned about how they may be losing the right to make their own medical decisions. He's going to want voters to be concerned about losing their ability to have health care. And he, of course, is going to remind voters of certain things that they found objectionable about President Trump's personality. He or she who controls the agenda generally determines the outcome of the election. And what both candidates here will be doing is trying to define the election in a way so that when voters vote, the issues they want on the agenda are foremost in the minds of the voters. Now, how do you do that in your campaign? Well, that's part of your campaign message and part of the way you express yourself, which is why we're now going to talk about your campaign message. Second thing we're going to talk about is it's an effective strategy that people use to win an election is a compelling message. Okay, what's a compelling message and what is a non-compelling message? Well, here's a message that's not very compelling. I just am running because I've always believed in public service and I just feel like stepping up to the plate and, I'm just going to listen to voters and do what they want me to do. There's nothing compelling about that message. That is a candidate in search of a reason for running, and that's not a good reason to run. That is someone on an ego trip. This is what a compelling message is. It's when you can tell voters exactly what you want to do when you get the job, what you're going to do with it in easily understood and meaty, substantive terms. That's the first element. The second element of a compelling message is something that conveys clearly the parameters of your moral code and the values that you're going to take with you that will help guide the way you behave in office and the way you vote or comport yourself. The third thing that is a piece of your compelling message is a story that lets people know that you mean what you say and that they can trust you to do the right thing when you're not looking. Fourth component is telling them just enough about yourself that they know your feet is on the ground and that you've done something real in your life and that you're not some clown or kook. And then there's the fifth element. And that's where this agenda piece comes in. Creating that piece determines the outcome of the election that I talked about in the first part of this. It's why you and why not your opponent. Why should voters vote for you and why shouldn't they vote for your opponent? Now, how you come up with that compelling contrast, and when candidates who kind of determine the agenda do this better than their opponents, that's why it's effective here, is can you say that your opponent can't say or will never say? What are you for that your opponent will never be for? What are you going to do that your opponent can't do or will never do? Now we're getting to the heart of that very important piece of your message. Why you, not them? This is how you figure out the answer. And once you figured out the answer, you know what it is to put before voters that will help determine the outcome of your race. That which you put in voters' minds and you want in their minds before they vote. The choice that they face in clear and stark terms. He who determines or she who determines the agenda generally wins the election. That's how it's done. Effective strategy number 3 is pretty simple. It's outsmarting your opponent. All right. So I can't tell you how to outsmart yours. I can just tell you that if you really want to outsmart your opponent, you should be able to know what to look for in order to outsmart your opponent. And I could go through a long laundry list of things, but what I'm going to do is refer you to a book and tell you, if you have not read it, you should. It's called The Art of War by Sun Tzu, written many, many years ago. But if you were to go to West Point, you'd find the cadets are carrying around. They read that book. If you're serious about winning a political campaign, let me strip away the veneer of it. Campaign is civilized warfare. We don't use guns and bullets, but we do use words, pictures, and symbols, and they're just as lethal sometimes. It doesn't make the process filthy. It's just by its nature very competitive, and people running for office are very ambitious, and they really want the job or they wouldn't be putting themselves through it, because at the end of the day, those who win have a lot of power. So you're in a high stakes game. Now, how do you outsmart? I'll give you a couple of things just to whet your appetite here. This is one of the things that I do in a political campaign when I'm hired by a candidate to help them. First thing I do is I go take a look at their opponent. And I put their opponent on Google Alert so that I always know. If you don't know what a Google Alert is, sign up for it and get it. If somebody makes news today, it immediately sends an email to you to tell you that they were in the news, what they said, and what they did. Now, what that means is, I told you part of the strategy here is determining the agenda. Well, in order to determine that agenda, I really need to know the opponent just as well as I know my client. I pay attention to the competition. And sometimes I pick up things and I learn that the opponent hasn't always been consistent in what they said, or that they've said one thing one place and another place someplace else. That's not dirty, that's just public record stuff. And that's legitimate in civilized warfare. I become an expert on the opponent. The second thing I do is, most competitive campaigns, the opponent has a team. People who do things for that candidate, maybe the ad makers, maybe the social media experts. I look at the team that that person has hired. I look at their patterns. I look at other campaigns that they've worked for, and I try and figure out what their patterns are, because most political consultants have a way of operating. They have their own little blue book. Sometimes I can anticipate what they're going to do, and knowing what they're going to do when I do this, what we do is called a headbutt in campaign. We lead them to believe we're going to do one thing, and the next day we do just the opposite of what they were expecting, and it throws them into total chaos. These are the fine-tuning aspects of winning an election. I've helped candidates go through this lots of times. Like I say, I can't tell you how to outsmart your opponent without knowing the particulars of your campaign, but I can tell you there's a great book to read, and then the next thing you do, if you haven't done it already, go read Sun Tzu, The Art of War. Effective strategy number 4. These are the candidates who somehow manage to be in the news. Day in and day out, you never see them dark on any day of the week. You just know they're a constant presence. What are they doing is they're capitalizing on news. They're paying attention to every breaking story, every hour of the day, looking for a news story that somehow is related to their campaign message and something that they want to do, or some evil that's happened because the policy on which they're campaigning wasn't in place to stop it. That's how you stay in the news. Now, these people court newspapers, they court the bookers at cable televisions, they court producers at radio stations. They have a contact list full of reporters. They look for ways to get in the news. They come up with press releases that are dicey. They manage to get a lot of attention. And it is one effective strategy that I've seen used in 9 times out of the 10, if you got 2 otherwise well-qualified equal candidates, the one that stays in the news more often, that seems to be in the paper every 2 or 3 days or every day toward the end of the campaign, is the one who gets the prize when the votes are counted. So pay attention to the news. Have your nose counters looking for stories or publications or news event that in some way is connected to something going on in your community, something that's in your campaign agenda, or sometimes when your opponent stumbles and you want to make an issue of it. One effective strategy, number 5, raise more money than your opponent. Now, that's not always possible. I understand that sometimes, particularly if you're challenging an incumbent, that may not be possible. But the title of this video is, what is one or what are several effective strategies to use in a political campaign? And man, if you can outraise your opponent 2 or 3 to 1, that is an effective strategy in a political campaign, because you can outshout your opponent on advertising and overwhelm them with your message. Now, your message still has to be compelling, but it is an effective strategy. I guess what I would say here is, do not ignore the task of raising money in a political campaign. It is the mother's milk of politics. It makes the world go around. It pays to see what the bills pay to disseminate your message to the people who hear it. Do not ignore that task. So we started this video with talking about one and other very effective strategies that candidates use to win a political campaign, and now I have a free gift to share with you. And the title of that video is How You Create a Campaign Strategy. Now here's why I'm going to suggest you watch it. In that video, which is a product of many years spent creating strategies for political candidates, is I go into details about exactly what you should be looking for as you determine a strategy that is just right for you, including some things that I did not cover in this video that will be very helpful to you. So take advantage of what I have learned that I can share with you in the 12 minutes it will take you to watch that video.